Welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show on 94.7 The Pulse. Music, interviews, news, and, well, two blokes chatting. Now, here are the two blokes.
Hey, we've got Mark Genge on the phone. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Neil. Hello, Rob. Thanks for having me on the Pulse. The Divinals, a great band live. One of the best Australian pub bands, I reckon.
Absolutely. Because I don't drink anymore, so I don't go to pubs. Don't drink any less, of course. But, Mark, thanks for joining us. We should introduce you as apart from having done quite a bit of radio, in fact, probably have worked with Dennis, but you are the AFL History and Statistics Consultant. Did I get those around the right way? Or Statistics and History Consultant?
Yeah, that's right. And I basically provide, I suppose, historical facts and stats to AFL staff. We also get public queries, someone writing a book. Sometimes you might get someone wanting some details of a family member played in the VFL, AFL. I like looking after queries like that because they don't know much about them, and then you tell them and they get all excited.
Yeah, and the difference between you and us is you actually research them, we make them up.
I know. I think I'm like a footy nerd. I've always liked my footy history. I remember when I started getting into footy history, I was fascinated with the early days, like the 1850s. I'm also fascinated with how, since the 1850s, how big a part footy is to so many people's lives, especially when it was sort of working class Melbourne suburbs like Fitzroy and Collingwood and Richmond. Their local teams meant a lot to the battlers.
Yeah, and I think there was certainly in that sort of Fitzroy, Carlton, Collingwood area and Richmond, where they were on top of one another, the battle lines were drawn down Smith Street, weren't they? Yeah,
and it was so easy to get to a ground. You could just walk, even though there was public transport. And so I suppose Geelong in those days, when there was just the Melbourne teams in Geelong must have almost seemed like an interstate team travelling by steam train down there.
Yeah, well, you haven't used the well-worn cliche, the longest trip in football. I'm disappointed. I thought that would have come out.
Well, yes, indeed, the longest trip in football. What do they call it? Culture wars or suburban warfare, the football was. Historically, when did it change, as you were just talking about then, it became very much part of the suburbs' whole being was the footy team. When did it change to that from being just a game? Was it around the First World War time?
What do you mean changing to
well, is it people would just go out and play footy for fun, but when did it become that real suburban identity and these cultural suburban battles that started to take place in Melbourne?
Well, what I've read, it was before the VFL, during the VFA days. The VFA started in 1877. There was a rivalry there from the start, especially between clubs like Melbourne and Carlton, because you had sort of an upper class club against a poorer class. So what I've read, it's always been there. And also the good thing with Australian football is that there's always been a lot of women involved. If you have a look at early sort of sketching and photos of crowds at footy matches, there's always a lot of female spectators there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think a lot of that sort of... part of it would have been partners, as we would call them now, as distinct from wives in those days, and sisters, I guess, but also just the fact that it was a community thing to do.
Yeah, and I suppose there's an outlet for people also. If you're working long hours all week and then you could sort of go to a match and just sort of yell out things, you could heckle people and have fun. I suppose there's very troubles. You're part of the gang, especially if your team was successful. And if you were battling, if you were just working class and struggling to make ends meet and your team was successful, it'd make you feel better.
I guess also, given that all the games were played at 2:10 on a Saturday afternoon in those days, that many people would go there on the way home from work.
Yes, because that's when people worked up until 12 o'clock. The footballers also. And I've heard some stories that, especially in the VFA days, that some of the matches... there was no sort of set time. They waited until players and a lot of spectators were there because of their working commitments.
Wow.
Mark, 100 years ago, it's just after the end of the First World War, and I suppose more than ever, football became a real positive vibe for what at that stage would have been a pretty sad environment in Melbourne, where so many people went off to war and didn't come back. So did the footy really kick back? Was this 1990, 1920 period of time where the game really got back into full swing?
Yeah, you're right about people becoming more optimistic, but people are still recovering from the war, though. Plus, they were recovering from the Spanish flu, which a lot of people died from. And I think it's amazing the number of VFL footballers who served in the war. There was about 750 men who played in the VFL since 1897 that enlisted, which is a huge number. And I suppose there's a way for people to feel good again, to go along to the local ground and support their team. There was also a lot of footballers playing from 1920 onwards who had actually served in the war, which I think is a great achievement when you think about what they must have went through in the trenches, then to come back and play elite sport.
Mark, straight after the war, at stages during the war, because of obvious reasons, there were only 4 teams in the competition, where Fitzroy famously won the Wooden Spoon and the premiership in the 1 year. Come 1920, had it got back up to the normal 8 or 10, or to start to grow slowly through the 20s? In
1920, there were 9 clubs. Now, there was originally at VFL there was 8 when the VFL started in 1897. Then Richmond and Uni joined in 1908. University pulled out at the end of 1914 to bring it back to 9 clubs, and it stayed at 9 up until 1925 when Footscray, Hawthorn and North Melbourne joined to bring it up to 12. But in the years during the war, the numbers did drop. You mentioned 1916, there were 4 teams. The following year there were 6 teams. In 1918, I think there were 8 teams, and Melbourne finally rejoined in 1919. So it was odd in a way having 9 clubs for so long. So you had the 4 matches and 1 club having a bye. But the venues that these clubs played at, there was Punt Road Oval, Princess Park, Lake Oval, Corio Oval, that's where Geelong played, East Melbourne Cricket Ground. That was Essendon's home ground up until, their last season was 1921. And the East Melbourne Cricket Ground was very close to the MCG. So you had 3 footy grounds very close to each other, probably within maybe 1 or 2 kilometres within each other. There was Punt Road Oval, the MCG, and the East Melbourne Cricket Ground. And there were some occasions where there was football matches played on those 3 grounds at the same time. So imagine what it would have been like afterwards.
Yeah. And of course, if you move slightly north, you would have had Princes Park, Victoria Park, and the Brunswick Street Oval, all relatively close together. Not that close, not as close as those 3 grounds, but still very similar locations. I guess it indicates how important the inner suburbs were to the clubs.
Yeah. Things also about 1920 had those grounds close to each other. There was no radio, so I guess people's main source of football news was newspapers or just word on the street.
Hanging around the pubs on the corner of Smith Street and Alexander Parade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they might have little runners on push bikes. Well, they wouldn't be runners, they'd be riders on push bikes transferring information from ground to ground.
Folks, we've got Mark Genge on the phone, and Mark is a statistician and historical consultant for the AFL. And we're talking about 1920 because Rob's been sitting on the other side of the desk here, Mark, trying to do some mathematics. It's 100 years ago, Rob. That's why we're focusing on 1920.
Just on my second birthday.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, indeed. So we go back to the 1920 season. It was the 24th VFL season, and I'm very excited to see the list that you very kindly sent through to us that had the teams, how many premierships they'd won at that stage. There was a team called Fitzroy sitting on top with 6. It was Richmond's first premiership. Was it their first grand final?
No, Richmond had lost the grand final before in 1990. But it was an impressive performance by Richmond because they had finished on the bottom of the ladder just a couple of years beforehand. So for the club, this was and their supporters, was a great achievement. Fitzroy, it was the 24th VFL season. Fitzroy had won 6 premierships up until that stage, so that's 6 out of 24. So that's 1 premiership every 4 years, which is a great achievement. I think it's also sad, Neil, you being a Fitzroy supporter, that the once most successful club in the competition no longer exists as Fitzroy. But then again, it's good that there's so many former Fitzroy supporters who feel that Fitzroy is a part of Brisbane. I like also how Brisbane still celebrate Fitzroy.
Well, the way I see it, and I've been saying this now for about 25 years, if my daughter was to marry, change her name and go into state, she's no less my daughter. And it's a bit the same with my football club. They got married and they moved into state and changed their name as well, but they're still my football club. And I think the people who haven't seen that, they have every right not to see that. I guess the disappointing thing, and I'm talking to the right man probably, is that as far as the AFL are concerned, Lachie Neale became the 4th Brownlow medalist of our club, when in fact it was the 12th time that a member of our club had won the Brownlow medal.
Yes, and you compare that to South Melbourne and Sydney, because Sydney is regarded as South Melbourne, whereas Brisbane's stats aren't regarded as Fitzroy, so it's a pity it is like that. Well,
Kevin Murray is not the leading games record holder at Brisbane, of the Brisbane Lions Australian Football Club. Yeah. Simon Black is, and Simon's a champion, absolutely champion. But it just disappoints me more than anything else that as far as the world is concerned, my club's won 3 premierships when in fact they've won 11.
Neil, I just wanted to put it to you about Kevin Murray. Bob Skilton was really big at creating the connection between Sydney and South Melbourne, and Kevin was very much a recluse. He would go to events and certainly fly the flag without doubt, but had he been a little bit more media savvy and open, do you think that might have helped bridge that gap?
Oh, he's been awesome for the club, and I think it's more about the fact that they haven't sought him out more than anything else, because it's not seen as being Fitzroy. But back to 1920, you also did some really good work for us, Mark, in terms of coming up with some of the ads that were going around. And I don't know whether it was a complete fluke or whether you actually chose an ad for a chemist that was in Ryrie Street, Geelong.
Yeah, I saw that. So some of the ads in the Football Record, they used to like to advertise beer and cigarettes and hotels and overcoats. There's also some interesting medical concoctions. There's one called Zambook, another for something called AMS. And as you said, it was available at a chemist, T.A. Dixon, 121 Ryrie Street in Geelong. Now, do you know anything about that location? Is there still a chemist there, I wonder?
I did some intensive research, brackets, I drove past this morning, close brackets. It is now housing a well-known chain of optical dispensers.
Oh, okay.
So it's not very far away, Specsavers. I'm not allowed to say that out loud.
What you should do then, take this ad in there and ask them, excuse me, do you have any AMS?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, it says here, but poor old Dicko, he's probably not there anymore, the chemist.
This is very interesting marketing, Neil. AMS, a medicinal extract of roots, barks and leaves, which has a better action than cascara.
Yeah. The only issue there becomes, what on earth is cascara? The other thing that I like is you haven't quite got this sort of thing in the Footy Record anymore. Can you imagine opening it up and instead of seeing an advert for a cigarette or a beer, have you indigestion, constipation, biliousness, headaches? Then your stomach is out of order. It does not digest your food perfectly. Your bowels are out of order. They do not expel the waste. Your liver is out of order. It does not aid either the stomach or the bowels to do their duty. As a result, you lose energy, get low-spirited, and many other distressing troubles.
There you go.
Yeah, sorry, hang on a minute.
Medical authorities warn that smoking is a health hazard.
So they sort of laid it on the line, didn't they?
Well, I know some football supporters are passionate. When their team loses, I think they suffer from a lot of those things.
The other one, Rob made a very interesting point, and I shouldn't take credit for his interesting observation, but Zambook, which sounds a little bit like an alcoholic beverage, but we won't go down that path, a product that contains no animal oil or fat, nor any mineral drug, you've got to wonder what it actually does then. Is this the cream and ointment form of magic spray?
Oh, you're right about magic. Look at what it does. It
incredible.
Burns and boils, pimples, poisoned wounds, bad legs.
Yeah. It's unequalled for cricketers, cyclists, football players and sportsmen generally. And Rob's going to now give us an idea of what we mean by embrocation. Can you tell us what embrocation is, please, Rob?
Can I take some time to research that, Neil? You've got me on the hop. No, I've never heard of that word. It's quite amazing. So this was the 1920 Football Record. This is the information that you could get as well as players' numbers. Quite amazing.
Yeah, also, I don't know if you saw the heights and weights there. I thought it's interesting that the tallest player playing in the grand final was 6'2" and a quarter, and that was Richmond's Barney Herbert. He was also the heaviest at 14 stone, 12 pounds, which was only 94 kilos. And there were only 8 footballers in that grand final taller than 6 foot.
Goodness gracious.
Quite amazing, isn't it? Because we were doing some talking the other day about Bob Pratt, the great full forward, 10 or 12 years after this. He played as a key forward at, I think, 5'10" and 75 kilos.
Yeah.
Quite staggering.
Which is the same as my right leg.
But last night they had that virtual Cox plate featuring all those champion horses from the past. I would love to have a virtual football match from teams from the past. And I think if the two teams I'd love is Fitzroy from the 1930s and South Melbourne from the 1930s. Fitzroy, some legends playing that team, but South Melbourne in particular because of Bob Pratt and Laurie Nash. I would love to see how they played.
Because they would have been traditional players of their position. As a full forward like Bob Pratt, he probably wouldn't have gone more than 15 yards outside from the goal. And it would have been 15 yards, not 15 metres,
right.
out from the goals.
But also, when you see photos of those two, they look confident. And the stories about them, that's what they seem to be like. They love talking about how good they were, but they gave that appearance too, that they knew how good they were, and they loved showing off, which that's why I would have loved to have seen them. Real showmen. Quite
amazing stuff. Now, Wayne Skippy Carroll will be listening this morning, and there's a bit of a connection between Mark and another AFL historian. Wayne will be able to chat to you about that off air, and I'll bet you can guess who that gentleman is in Good Morning Lloyd if you're listening. You historians obviously get together and just throw notes around. Cole Hutcheson was mentioned before. We've had him in the studio a couple of times, a man who just peels the stats off the tongue. Is that a long-term ambition of yours to be mentioned in the same sentence as the great Cole Hutcheson, Mark?
Well, it'd certainly be an honour. One day, I'll take both of you around to the office at AFL House, and you can see Cole has sort of officially retired from the AFL, but he'll still be involved. He'll still be coming in. And I'll take you in there and show you the amount of work that Cole has done. He's done, over the years, 20, 30 years, whatever it is, he's done so many spreadsheets containing all these different stats, and Cole is always updating them. It's amazing the amount of stuff that he's done. And I just love footy history because there's just so much to do. Like I'm talking about 1920 to today. That's just one small part of it. But before we get today, I'll give you a warning in advance. I want to tell you a story about a Richmond ruckman on grand final night with some crayfish.
We love a good footy story.
Okay, here we go then. Barney Herbert, mentioned Barney Herbert before. He was the Richmond ruckman. He was the tallest and heaviest player in the grand final. He was also a policeman. And Barney Herbert's claim to fame is that he helped to popularise the saying, "Eat 'em alive." Apparently he would rev up the team before a game by saying it. And they said that he used to growl, "Eat 'em alive," after a win. Anyway, after Richmond won the 1920 grand final, players and officials, they celebrated at a seafood dinner in St Kilda in Ackland Street, and afterwards they grabbed some of the fish and crabs and crayfish, which would do that after a couple of drinks. Apparently they drove around yelling out, "Eat 'em alive." Then they went to the Richmond Town Hall, where a lot of supporters had gathered, and in front of the town hall there was a bust of a former long-time Richmond Footy Club president, George Bennett. He was president of Richmond Footy Club during the tough times. Anyway, Barney Herbert, he made a speech, then he climbed on top of the bust and he had a crayfish in each hand, and he yelled out to the crowd, "What did we do?" And the crowd replied, "Eat 'em alive." What a way to celebrate.
And that was very much part of when television through the 60s and those banners that hung on the Great Southern Stand at the MCG, and "Eat 'em alive" was certainly a very common one when Richmond were playing.
That's a great saying. Well, growing up, I remember, being a Richmond supporter, I remember the slogan, Tetley Tigers running hot and strong.
I can remember as a Fitzroy banner that there was a game they once played at the MCG, he said through gritted teeth. No, they used to play a couple of games a year in those days. And they had a sign or a banner they put around the fence if they could squeeze it in, and it had something like the fantastic, ferocious Fitzroy, the leaping, lusty lions.
Yes. Magnificent.
The other thing too that you did a huge amount of research, which has put us to shame enormously, which is why we sound like we know what we're talking about. Some of the nicknames back in those days: Checker, Flipper, Ginger, Nuts. Ironically, Ginger Nuts, Chicken. Chicken was a fairly popular one, wasn't it?
Well, he
Flapper,
became a Brownlow medalist.
different chicken.
It was a different chicken.
Torchy, Snowy, and Sugar. Do you reckon if there was TV in those days, Bruce would have been going, it's gone out to Flapper. He's good, Snowy, isn't he? Or would he actually use the surnames like they should?
Probably back in those days. The surname.
But when they were playing, if footballers used those names. Oh, actually, that reminds me of another story. What was it with I mentioned Barney Herbert. Now, Richmonds, Ruckman, there's two of them, Barney Herbert and Dave Moffat, and they had a rover, Clary Horn. I suppose this is sort of related to nicknames. They used to use rhyming slang as a secret code for their boundary throw-ins. So the three of them will go to the boundary throw-in, and sometimes one of them would yell out hammer and jack, and that meant over the back. Another one was growl and grunt, which was hit to the front. And another one was get your hair dyed, which is hit to the side. So I think it's fascinating that footballers were using codes like that just so the opposition would have no idea.
It would take them two boundary throws, I would have thought. I'm going to be listening to the broadcast tonight, and if I hear anyone say, Bangerfield, we'll know who's really going to get the ball. or kick it forward and get it to Giewalt. We'll work out who it is, I reckon, pretty quickly.
Who's he play for?
He's got a surname, has he? That's right.
I've got some other nicknames if you want for some of the Geelong footballers from 1920.
Sure.
There was Oily, Bunny, as Alec Eason, Dodo, Onions, as Jim Matheson, Ticker, that's Cliff Rankin, a footballer you might have heard of. Now, Ticker, I'm not sure, was something to do with his heart, or maybe he was a clockmaker. There was also Jumbo and Dasher. And Jumbo, we should mention, that was Wallace Sharland. Wallace Sharland, he went on to become one of the first broadcasters on radio when radio started broadcasting footy matches in the mid-20s.
Did you find the origins of the most famous Geelong nickname of that period, Edward Cargillo Greaves?
Yes. Now, it's... there was a character named, was it Cargillo the Raja of Bong? I think that's what it is, Cargillo the Raja of Bong. And I've heard two stories. Raja of Bong was either a character in a play or he was a touring musician.
Okay. And he got Cargie for short, and he must have done something with our Cargie Edward, and there the story was born. Yeah. We must look into that one. Makes perfectly good sense.
1920, Cargie Greaves would have been at Geelong College.
Yes, definitely in the early 20s, and I think runner-up the Brownlow medal. Won the first Brownlow medal, and runner-up in a couple after that. So
1924 was the first one, wasn't it?
Quite a player.
Yeah, and 1920 there was no Brownlow because Charles Brownlow was still alive.
So there's been a lot of Geelong history in the formation of the AFL. Obviously, the second oldest footy club on the planet, I do believe.
Sporting club,
yeah.
Continuous sporting club, yeah.
So with Brownlow and Cargie Greaves, two of the early pioneers that set the game up and gave it a real distinct Geelong flavour.
Yeah, also Geelong were the first successful club in football. Back in their VFA days, when they had that golden run in the late 1870s, early 1880s, when they won 7 premierships in 9 seasons. And I think it's surprising then that Geelong's first VFL flag was in 1925. Because they're such a strong team in the VFA, why did it take them so long? So what's that, 39 years?
Might have been a bit of politics. There's some interesting stories here regarding local football where one particular club didn't like Geelong pinching their players, so they organised an arrangement with the Fitzroy and St Kilda football clubs in Melbourne, and they would sell their good players off to them rather than going to Geelong. So maybe they missed out on a bit of recruiting potential due to politics. So it was way back in the game, way back then.
Yes, I suppose there was some jealousy also. Maybe the Melbourne clubs feared that Geelong were becoming a super team. Oh, we should also mention that in 1920, with Geelong played at Cargillo Oval. Last year I went to a magnificent exhibition at the Geelong Gallery. It was Geelong Football Club memorabilia. Was it the Bob Gartland collection?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
Involved with the footy club. And in that display there was a large photo of Cargillo Oval, and you can see around the ground people are sitting in their horse and buggies watching the game. It's a magnificent photo.
Rob, where was the Cargillo Oval?
The sort of Eastern Gardens.
Right,
neck of the woods out there somewhere. Yep. I think it's probably a golf course now, to be perfectly honest.
Yep. No, because I had visions of it, not the Cargillo Oval where Cargillo plays at the moment. The other question I've got for you, Mark, two questions, in fact, related to the page you sent through from the footy record. The first one relates to, I noticed that the football record shows the players listed in position, which in itself is a bit old-fashioned, but they've got numbers. When was the first season that players had numbers in the AFL?
Well, when the football record started in 1912, there was one reason why they brought in the football record. They trialled the numbers in the final series of 1911.
Yep.
But full time for every club, it was 1912, round one 1912, which was the first edition of the football record. And
of course, the second an intermediate question that's just popped up is. It says at the bottom of the page, the Cathedral Hotel is the noted house for good drinks, no ringtails. I'm not exactly sure what a ringtail is. Can you help me there?
Don't bring your possum when you come for a drink.
No. So is it some sort of ruffian-type person, I wonder? I don't know.
I don't know. Rob's always been called a ringtail, but I thought it was because his nickname was Possum. And the other thing that's notable is that when we see this equivalent diagram from the 60s and 70s in the footy record, of course, on one side you've got the reserves and on the other side you've got the ruckman and rovers. On this diagram, the ruck and rovers are listed on the ground as distinct from off to the side as they are, and there are no reserves.
Oh, that's right, yeah. In 1920, there were 18 players in a club. 18 players in a team playing at the one time. There were no reserves, interchange, whatever, which meant if a player was injured during a game, or bad luck, they either propped them up and kept playing.
Let them against the goalpost.
They couldn't play, they just played short. And there were examples of some teams playing with a player or two short because they couldn't replace them.
I would have thought that may encourage some players of a certain ilk to encourage tactics that may cause players to not be able to see out the game. I think I've got out of that without slandering anybody.
Yeah, I suppose with just the one field umpire that was possible. If an umpire was down the other end of the ground, then you could probably do that. You could probably try and encourage someone to go off the ground.
But wouldn't you be picked up on the video?
You might be picked up on the sketching.
With the power of Google, I can inform you that the Australian slang for ringtail is someone or something energetic and powerful asks that the ring-tailed snorter to calm down for a little while. So it is someone who maybe can't hold their liquor and gets a bit playful.
Indeed.
Well, it's interesting that they used that word in that ad.
Yeah, so obviously they'd had some troubles with their ringtails in the past. Amusingly, the Cathedral Hotel, I'm assuming it was somewhere near a cathedral, because it's in Swanston Street. I'm assuming it was over that. Might have been Young and Jackson's. Was Young and Jackson's ever called the Cathedral?
I wouldn't have thought so.
No, you would have thought it was called the Princess Bridge Hotel, wasn't it? That's its official name. Young and Jackson's is its nickname.
Yeah, well, that's still. I think that's still written on the side of the building, Princess Bridge Hotel.
Yeah, absolutely. Mate, we need to get going, and I think we might see if we can't find a spot for you to come back and chat during the off-season. What do you think, Rob?
We'd love that, and when you come to Geelong, hop in the car with Lloyd Fisk and bring him down as well, and we would love to chat to you both about stats and stuff, because it is fascinating the way the footy world has changed over a long period of time, and we really appreciate your time. And good luck with your career, because I think you've got a pretty good base to be the new Cole Hutcheson.
Yep, no worries. Okay, thanks very much, Neil. Thanks, Rob. And I enjoyed the show. It's great. Well done. And thanks for promoting Australian football.